The fluorescent hospital lights flickered faintly, casting a pale glow over the sterile walls of room 317. Machines beeped softly in the background, their rhythmic sounds blending with the occasional footsteps of nurses moving through the hall. The air smelled of antiseptic and warm blankets, a scent that had become far too familiar to Ethan Carter. The frail 7-year-old curled beneath a thick hospital quilt. His mother, Sarah, sat beside him, her fingers gently running through his thinning brown hair. She had spent countless nights in this same chair, watching over her son, whispering words of encouragement, even when her own faith felt thin. Ethan's battle with leukemia had consumed their lives, turning what should have been childhood filled with playgrounds and laughter into a routine of IV drips, medications, and whispered prayers. Tonight, however, there was something different in the air, a quiet anticipation. Ethan's small hands clutched a worn piece of paper, the edges crinkled from the many times he had unfolded and refolded it. His handwriting, shaky but determined, filled the page. It was a letter, one he had written weeks ago, addressed to Barron Trump. "Do you think he got it, Mom?" Ethan asked, his voice fragile but hopeful. Sarah's heart clenched. She had wanted to believe it was possible, had even let herself dream for a moment that maybe, just maybe, someone out there had read her son's words. But deep down, she knew the odds. Powerful people received thousands of letters every day. What were the chances that Barron Trump had even seen this one? "I don't know, sweetheart," she admitted, forcing a smile as she tucked the blanket around him. "But I do know that people surprise us in ways we don't always expect." Ethan nodded, his eyelids drooping slightly from exhaustion. I just think he'd understand. You know?" Sarah swallowed hard. She did know. While Barron Trump was not someone they had ever met, Ethan had always seen something in him. A quiet strength, an unspoken resilience in the way he carried himself, despite growing up in the harsh spotlight of the world. Just as Sarah was about to suggest Ethan get some rest, a soft knock echoed from the hospital room door. She turned sharply, exchanging a puzzled glance with the night nurse standing in the hallway. The nurse hesitated for a second before nodding toward the door. "You might want to see this," she whispered. Sarah's pulse quickened. The door creaked open, and standing there, framed by the dim hallway light, was Barron Trump. Sarah's breath hitched, her mind struggling to process the reality in front of her. He was taller than she had expected, dressed simply in a dark jacket and jeans. His usually composed face held something different tonight: warmth, sincerity, purpose. Ethan, still groggy, blinked once, then twice. Then his breath caught in his throat. His fingers clenched around his letter, eyes shimmering with disbelief. "Mom," he whispered, voice barely audible. "It's him." Sarah felt her chest tighten as tears welled up in her eyes. Barron took a step forward, his voice calm but filled with genuine warmth. "Hey, Ethan," he said with a small smile. "I got your letter." And in that moment, the cold hospital room felt a little warmer. Sarah felt frozen in place, unable to fully grasp what was happening. Barron Trump was standing in her son's hospital room. For weeks, she had watched Ethan cling to the hope that his letter might reach the boy he admired. She had feared the inevitable heartbreak when nothing came of it. But now, as Barron took another step inside, his presence felt surreal. Ethan's eyes were wide, his small body trembling with excitement and disbelief. You really got my letter?" Barron nodded, his expression sincere. "I did," he said, stepping closer to the hospital bed. "And I knew I had to come meet you." Sarah's hand instinctively found her mouth, choking back a sob. She had spent so long trying to be strong for Ethan. Now, seeing her son light up in a way he hadn't in months, it was almost too much to take in. Ethan clutched the letter in his hands as if to make sure he wasn't dreaming. "I thought maybe you wouldn't see it," he admitted, his voice shaking. Barron smiled, settling into the chair beside the bed. "I see a lot of things," he said. "But your letter, that wasn't something I could ignore." Sarah took a deep breath, regaining her composure. I don't even know what to say," she stammered. "Ethan has looked up to you for a long time." Barron turned his gaze back to Ethan, his voice calm but filled with sincerity. "Why me?" he asked gently. Ethan hesitated for a moment, as if trying to find the right words. "Because you're different," he finally said. You're not loud like other people on TV. You don't try to be something you're not. And I just thought you'd understand what it's like to feel alone sometimes." Sarah's breath hitched. Those were the words Ethan had never fully spoken to her. His deepest fears, his loneliness in the hospital, his quiet struggles. For the first time, she truly understood why this moment meant everything to him. Barron didn't speak right away. He just sat there, letting Ethan's words settle in. Then, with the quiet confidence he was known for, he said, "I do understand." Ethan looked up at him, his eyes shimmering. "You do?" Barron nodded. "I know what it's like to feel like the world is watching you but not really seeing you. It can be lonely." Ethan blinked rapidly, as if trying to hold back tears. "Yeah," he whispered. Sarah wiped a tear from her cheek, overwhelmed by the sheer depth of the moment unfolding before her. This wasn't just a simple visit. This wasn't just a celebrity moment. This was two boys from completely different worlds connecting in a way few people ever could. The hospital room, usually filled with the hum of machines and distant conversations, now held something much more powerful: understanding, hope, and a bond that neither of them had expected. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan didn't feel so alone. For a moment, time seemed to stand still in the small hospital room. The rhythmic beeping of Ethan's heart monitor and the soft hum of the hallway outside faded into the background. All that mattered was this moment. Ethan swallowed hard, still gripping his letter. He had imagined this meeting 1,000 times, but now that it was actually happening, he didn't know what to say. Barron seemed to sense this and spoke first. "You know, I don't usually do this," he admitted with a small smile. "But when I read your letter, something about it stuck with me. It wasn't just about meeting me, it was about finding someone who understood you." Ethan nodded quickly. I just wanted to talk to someone who knows what it's like," he said. "To feel like people see you, but don't really see you." Barron's expression softened. "Yeah, I get that." Sarah, still seated at the edge of the bed, wiped at the corner of her eye. She had spent years trying to find the right words to comfort Ethan, to remind him that he wasn't alone. And yet, in just a few sentences, Barron had done what she never could. He had made Ethan feel seen. Ethan shifted slightly, his energy fragile but his excitement overpowering his exhaustion. "I watch interviews with you sometimes," he confessed. "People talk about you a lot. They say things, but you don't really say much back. I think that's cool." Barron chuckled. "Sometimes it's better to listen than to talk," he said. "That way, when you do say something, people actually hear it." Ethan nodded. "That makes sense." There was a quiet pause before Barron reached into his jacket pocket. "I brought something for you," he said, pulling out a small, neatly folded piece of paper. Ethan's eyes widened as Barron handed it to him. Slowly, he unfolded the paper, his fingers trembling slightly. It was a handwritten letter. From Barron. Ethan's lips parted as he scanned the words. It wasn't long, but it didn't have to be. Every line was personal, written just for him. "Ethan, you are stronger than you think. Never let the world tell you who you are. You already know. Keep fighting. You inspire more people than you realize. Barron." Ethan ran his fingers over the words, as if trying to memorize every letter. Sarah's breath hitched, her hands gripping the blanket on Ethan's lap. This was not just some standard, impersonal letter. This was something truly from the heart. Ethan's chin quivered slightly, and for the first time in months, his eyes shimmered. Not from pain, but from overwhelming joy. "You wrote this?" Ethan whispered. Barron nodded. "I did." Ethan exhaled, holding the letter close to his chest. "I'm going to keep this forever." Barron smiled. "Good, because it's true." And in that moment, the visit wasn't just about a famous last name or a kind gesture. It was about something much deeper: connection, understanding, and a reminder that even in the hardest times, no one is truly alone. Ethan stared down at the letter, his small hands trembling as he held it close. For so long, he had felt invisible, like just another kid in a hospital bed, fighting a battle no one outside these walls could truly understand. But now, sitting right next to him, was someone who did. Barron watched Ethan carefully, sensing the weight of the moment. He knew that for Ethan, this wasn't just about meeting someone famous. It was about finally feeling seen, heard, and valued. Sarah struggled to keep her emotions in check. She had spent endless nights whispering reassurances to her son, promising him that life still held magic, that hope was never too far away. But tonight, she didn't need to say anything. Hope had walked through the door on its own. "Ethan," Barron said gently, "what's the hardest part about being here?" Ethan hesitated. No one had really asked him that before, not like this. Doctors asked about his symptoms, nurses asked about his comfort, but no one had asked how he really felt. He swallowed, his voice quiet. "I think it's not knowing if I'll ever go home for good." Sarah's breath caught. Ethan had never admitted this out loud. Barron didn't look away, didn't shift uncomfortably the way some adults did when faced with the reality of a sick child's fears. Instead, he nodded, letting Ethan know it was okay to be honest. "That's a big thing to carry," Barron said. "But you know what? You're carrying it better than most grown-ups ever could." Ethan blinked rapidly, trying to hold back tears, but his composure wavered. "Sometimes I feel like I have to be strong for everyone else. But it's really hard." Barron leaned forward slightly. "You don't always have to be strong," he said. "It's okay to be scared. Being strong doesn't mean pretending you're not afraid. It means fighting anyway." Ethan sniffled, his grip tightening on the letter. "Is that what you do?" Barron thought for a moment before answering. "Yeah. A lot of people think strength is about never showing weakness, but real strength is knowing when to let people in." Sarah wiped a tear from her cheek, overwhelmed by the sincerity of Barron's words. This wasn't a rehearsed answer. This wasn't for cameras. This was just one young man offering genuine reassurance to a boy who needed it more than anything. A soft knock at the door broke the moment. A nurse peeked in, hesitating before speaking. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said gently, "but Ethan needs to rest soon." Ethan's face fell slightly, his time with Barron coming to an end too soon. But before he could dwell on it, Barron smiled and reached into his jacket pocket again. "I have one more thing for you," he said, pulling out a small silver bracelet. It was simple, engraved with a single word: fighter. Ethan's lip quivered. "For me?" Barron nodded. "So you never forget what you are." Sarah covered her mouth, overwhelmed by emotion. Ethan slipped the bracelet onto his wrist, staring at it like it was the most valuable thing in the world. And at that moment, he truly believed he could keep fighting. Ethan held his wrist up, staring at the engraved word: fighter. His fingers traced the smooth metal as if trying to memorize the feeling, as if wearing it made him stronger. Barron watched the boy's reaction carefully, a small smile playing on his lips. He hadn't come here for the cameras, for headlines, or for publicity. He had come because he understood, because someone needed him to show up. Sarah wiped at her eyes again, her heart so full she could barely breathe. For the first time in months, Ethan wasn't just a patient in a hospital bed. He was a kid again, a kid with hope. Ethan let out a deep breath. "I won't take it off," he said softly, looking up at Barron. "Ever." Barron chuckled. "Good. But there's one condition." Ethan blinked. "What?" Barron leaned forward. "You have to promise me you'll keep fighting, even on the days when it's really hard." Ethan swallowed hard. "Even when it feels like I can't?" Barron nodded. "Especially then." Ethan's lip quivered, but he smiled. A real, genuine smile, one that Sarah hadn't seen in so long. "I promise," Ethan whispered. Barron held out his hand and Ethan weakly reached for it. Their handshake was gentle, but the moment felt unbreakable. The nurse stepped forward, gently placing a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "We really should let him rest," she whispered apologetically. Sarah nodded, but she could see the longing in her son's eyes. He didn't want this moment to end. Barron saw it too. He hesitated for a moment, then reached into his jacket pocket one last time, pulling out his personal phone. "How about this?" Barron said, unlocking the screen and handing it to Ethan. "Put in your mom's number, I'll check in on you." Sarah gasped softly. You don't have to do that," she said, her voice breaking. Barron shook his head. "I want to." Ethan's hands shook as he typed in Sarah's number, his face glowing with disbelief. He handed the phone back, watching as Barron saved the contact under Ethan-Fighter. Barron stood, adjusting his jacket. "I'll text you, okay? Keep me updated on your progress." Ethan nodded vigorously, his excitement bubbling over. "I will." Sarah rose from her chair, still struggling to find the words. "Thank you," she whispered. This means everything." Barron met her gaze with a quiet sincerity. "He's stronger than he knows," he said. "And so are you." Sarah let out a small, breathy laugh, pressing a hand over her heart. Barron turned back to Ethan. "All right, fighter. I'll talk to you soon." Ethan grinned, his fingers still clutching his bracelet. "See you soon." As Barron walked to the door, he paused for just a moment, turning back for one last glance at the small boy who had just changed his life as much as he had changed his. And then, he was gone. But the warmth he left behind? That would stay forever. The hospital room felt different after Barron left. The same walls, the same machines, the same fluorescent lights. But something had changed. Ethan lay in bed, still gripping his bracelet, still holding on to the letter. His body may have been weak, but his spirit felt stronger than ever. Sarah sat beside him, watching the way he stared at his wrist, as if the word fighter had given him new energy. Tears welled in her eyes, not out of sadness, but out of pure gratitude. She reached over and brushed his hair gently. "How do you feel, baby?" she whispered. Ethan looked up at her, his eyes shimmering, not with exhaustion, but with determination. "I feel like I can do this," he said, gripping the bracelet tighter. Sarah let out a soft laugh, her heart swelling. "You always could," she said. "You just needed a reminder." Outside in the hallway, word of Barron's visit had already begun to spread. Nurses whispered to each other. Doctors stopped at the front desk and hospital staff exchanged astonished glances. "That was really him?" one nurse whispered. "I've never seen Ethan smile like that," another said, wiping away a tear. A young intern, barely out of medical school, shook his head in amazement. "I've been in pediatrics for a while now," he murmured, "but I've never seen a visit change a kid like that before." And he was right, because from that moment on, Ethan wasn't just fighting to survive, he was fighting to live. The next morning, Sarah woke up to find Ethan more awake than usual, more eager to sit up and talk. When the nurse came in to check his vitals, she smiled. "You're looking better today, Ethan." Ethan held up his wrist, showing off his bracelet. "It's because I have a reminder now," he said proudly. "I'm a fighter." The nurse's throat tightened, but she smiled. "Yes, you are." Later that day, Sarah's phone buzzed. A new message. She grabbed it quickly, her heart skipping a beat. "Barron. How's our fighter doing today?" Sarah covered her mouth, holding back a sob. He hadn't just made a promise, he was keeping it. She turned to Ethan, showing him the screen. His face lit up and he eagerly reached for the phone. "Can I text him back?" Sarah smiled. "Of course, sweetheart." Ethan's fingers tapped the screen carefully. "I'm still fighting." A few moments later, the reply came. "Barron, that's what I like to hear. Keep going, buddy. I believe in you." Tears rolled down Sarah's cheeks as she watched Ethan clutch the phone like a lifeline. Hope had been restored in her son's heart. The story of Barron's visit soon spread beyond the hospital walls. A nurse shared it on social media, and within hours, it went viral. People all over the world read about a boy who refused to give up, and a young man who showed up when it mattered most. News stations picked it up. Headlines followed. Barron Trump's surprise visit changes a young boy's life forever. A heartfelt moment that left everyone in tears. One visit, one bracelet, one promise. A story of strength and kindness. But for Ethan and Sarah, it wasn't about the headlines. It was about the moment. It was about knowing that no matter what happened next, they weren't alone. And as Ethan drifted off to sleep that night, one thought lingered in his mind. I can do this. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to reflect on the power of kindness. Sometimes, the simplest gestures, a visit, a letter, a single word of encouragement, can change a life forever. Ethan's story reminds us that hope is real, and no one fights alone. Whether it's a loved one, a friend, or even a stranger, we all have the ability to lift someone up when they need it most. Share this story with someone who could use a little inspiration today. Leave a comment below. What does fighting mean to you? Subscribe for more heartwarming stories that remind us of the strength we all carry inside. Because sometimes a single moment of kindness is enough to change everything.